I found the photograph inside a book that shouldn't have been there. It was an old leather-bound album of pressed flowers, violets mostly, browned and crumbling, their scent long gone. It belonged to my great-grandmother, whose things I'd inherited after she passed. The book had been sitting in a cedar trunk in my parents' attic for years. I opened it, expecting only brittle petals and faint stains of color. Instead, between the last 2 pages, I found a cabinet card. The cardboard mount was yellowed, the edges rubbed soft by fingers long gone. Printed in fine gold letters along the bottom was the name Hollinsworth and Company. Studio, Brighton, 1894. The photograph itself was of a family of 3. A man sat stiffly in a wooden chair, his posture too upright to be natural. He wore a dark suit that swallowed the light, his hair slicked and parted with precision. Beside him stood a woman, her gloved hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She wore a high-necked gown of pale silk, embroidered down the bodice, her hair arranged in the tidy coils fashionable at the time. Between them stood a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, dressed in a sailor suit with polished buttons and serious eyes. Everything about the composition was proper, almost painfully so. The backdrop, painted curtains, a marble pedestal with a vase, was identical to dozens of other studio portraits from the era. The lighting was even, the exposure perfect. Yet something about the image felt wrong. I couldn't explain it at first. The family's expressions were mild and expectant, but their bodies seemed oddly rigid, as if their balance depended on something unseen. The boy's eyes were the worst of it. They looked unfocused, slightly misaligned, the left just a touch higher than the right. Not a defect of birth, something else. I told myself it was just the long exposure time. In those days, people had to sit motionless for seconds at a time, sometimes longer. Any tremor could blur the image. That tension, the effort to be still, always left a ghostly quality in old portraits. But there was something in the mother's face that kept pulling me back. She was beautiful, in a fragile way. Delicate features, pale lips, eyes that seemed almost too aware. Yet her right arm was angled oddly, close to her side, her hand hidden completely in the folds of her gown. At first, I thought it was simply the way her dress fell. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. She was holding something. That night, I brought the photograph downstairs and studied it under lamplight. Up close, the details emerged more sharply. The man's left ear was bent slightly at the top, a small imperfection. The boy's collar had a faint crease, the kind a mother would normally fix before allowing a photo. The mother's hand, though, what she was hiding, remained indistinct. I tilted the frame toward the light. There was definitely something there, pressed against the fabric. A faint outline, rectangular, the size of a small envelope. A letter. The thought settled with a chill that felt irrational. Why would a woman hold a letter in a family portrait? Still, curiosity got the better of me. I began searching for Hollinsworth and Company online, hoping to find a record of their studio. To my surprise, there was one, an archival listing from the Brighton Historical Society. The studio had operated from 1882 to 1897, run by a photographer named Alfred Hollinsworth and his wife, Clara. There was even a digital scan of their ledger. The entries were neat, each client's name recorded beside the date of their sitting. I scrolled through, and there it was. April 14th, 1894. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne and son, Edward. 4 cabinet prints ordered. Retouch requested. Paid in full. The Thornes. The name meant nothing to me, but the handwriting caught my attention. Beneath that entry, in smaller script, almost as if added later, was another note. Plate retained. Not for reproduction. Client requested destruction. Refused. Refused. I reread that word several times. Photographers rarely kept negatives once a family had taken their prints. There was no reason to, unless unless they wanted to preserve something they found curious. I emailed the archivist listed on the site, a woman named Janine, and asked if the plate still existed. She wrote back within the hour. Yes, we have the original glass plate. It's never been displayed. Hollingsworth's notes describe it as an anomalous exposure. Would you like to view it by appointment? The next week, I took the train to Brighton. The Historical Society was housed in an old municipal building, its corridors lined with portraits whose subjects stared out as if waiting to be remembered. Janine met me in the reading room, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, who carried a folder and a faint air of hesitation. "You'll want to see this yourself," she said, leading me to a light table in the archive. She placed the glass plate on the surface and switched on the backlight. The image bloomed to life in pale silver tones, clearer and more haunting than the print I'd found. The same family, the Thorns, the same arrangement. But there were differences. The boy's face was sharper here, his eyes open wider, and his hands seemed to tremble slightly, though motion blur should have softened them. The father's gaze was fixed, almost defiant. And the mother, her face looked not at the camera, but slightly to the side, as though she'd been distracted by something outside the frame, and in her hand, now clearly visible, was the letter. It wasn't folded delicately as I'd assumed. It was crumpled, creased, its edges torn. One corner had what looked like a fingerprint, faint but dark. Janine adjusted the light to enhance the contrast. "There," she said quietly, pointing. "Look closer." I leaned in. On the paper, though blurred, was a single word scrawled in ink. It was just legible enough to read. "Forgive." The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that word. Who had written it? Why hide it? Why include it in a portrait meant to capture familial harmony? Janine helped me dig deeper. We found a brief mention of the Thorns in a local newspaper from May 1894, barely a month after the photo was taken. Tragic circumstance in the Thorn household. Mr. Albert Thorn of Haverley Lane was found deceased at his residence on the morning of May 19th. Authorities cite accidental poisoning as the cause. He leaves behind a widow, Mrs. Eliza Thorn, and one child. No foul play suspected. Accidental poisoning. But the coroner's record told a different story. The death had been due to chloroform ingestion, common enough in that era, used as anesthesia, but deadly in high doses. The report noted unclear intent, and there was a final note, scribbled by the attending physician. Wife claims letter was written night prior. Refuses to produce it. The letter. I felt a shiver run through me. I stayed in Brighton a few days longer, sifting through what remained of the town's archives. There was little more about the Thorns, no court cases, no scandal. But among the Hollingsworth papers, I found a notebook belonging to the photographer himself. April entries described routine sittings, weddings, infants, widows. But April 14th, the Thorn family, was different. His handwriting was meticulous until that page. Then, scrawled at the bottom, a line that made my stomach knot. Client's wife insisted the plate be destroyed. Claims image captured movement she did not make. Said her hand twitched on its own. Refused to touch photograph. Sent made for collection. Child cried when leaving studio. Will reprint privately for study. That was the last mention of them. I took a train home the next day, the photograph carefully wrapped in its original sleeve. I tried to tell myself it was all coincidence, a family tragedy, nothing more. But something inside me knew the story wasn't finished. A month later, I was woken by a sound in my study. It was a soft thud, like a frame falling. I turned on the lamp and saw the album of pressed flowers lying open on the floor. The photograph had slipped out and landed face up. The mother's face seemed different. Her eyes, once directed slightly off camera, now appeared to look straight ahead. Her mouth was parted, not a smile, not even a frown, but something caught between them. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was imagination. Yet even when I turned away and looked again, the change remained. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly, and saw that the letter, the faint outline in her hand, looked more pronounced, almost darker than before. The next morning, I took it outside, intending to photograph it in natural light for comparison. But when I tried, my camera refused to focus on the mother's hand. The image would blur, no matter what angle I tried. That was when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the back of the cardboard mount, faintly written in pencil, were the initials E.T., followed by a date, May 19th, 1894, the day Albert Thorne had died. And beneath it, another word, half erased, still. I sent a message to Janine, asking if she could check whether any of the other Hollingsworth plates from that period showed irregularities. She replied 2 days later. We examined several negatives from 1894. None show defects or tampering, but there's something else you should know. The Thorne plate is gone. Gone. Apparently, sometime during cataloguing, the plate had disappeared from the archive. There were no signs of theft, no broken cases, no misplaced files. It was simply missing. I wanted to believe it was an administrative error, but a part of me didn't. I tried to put it out of my mind. Weeks passed. Life resumed its rhythm of work, errands, and evenings blurred by habit. But small things began to unsettle me. At night, I'd hear paper rustling, soft and deliberate, as if someone were turning pages in another room. I'd find the photograph on the desk, though I knew I'd placed it in the drawer. Once, I woke to find the word "forgive" faintly traced in dust on my window pane. The rational part of me fought it. Old houses creak, drafts move papers, dust writes patterns we project meaning onto. But one night, I dreamt of the studio. The backdrop curtains swayed, though there was no breeze. The boy stood motionless, eyes wide, and the mother lifted her hand slowly, revealing the letter. The word on it shimmered, "Forgive," and beneath it, in darker ink, something new appeared. He wouldn't. I woke with my heart pounding. My fingers smelled faintly of ink. The next morning, I decided to have the photograph tested. A friend at a university lab agreed to examine it under infrared light to see if there were hidden layers or chemical inconsistencies. When the results came back, he sounded unsettled. "There's no forgery," he said, "no paint or retouching. But there's something strange under the emulsion, a faint secondary image." "What kind of image?" "Hard to say. It looks like handwriting, overlapping the mother's hand." He sent me the scan. Beneath the folds of the dress, written so faintly it would never be visible to the naked eye, were 2 words: "Don't look." That night, I burned the photograph, or tried to. The cardboard mount blackened easily, curling at the edges, but the photograph itself, thin as tissue, refused to catch. The surface bubbled and darkened but didn't disintegrate. When I finally dropped it into the fire grate, it released a sound, not a crackle, but a sharp hiss, like a held breath escaping. When I reached in with tongs to crush the ashes, I saw that the image had survived, ghostly pale, the family still intact. Only the letter was gone. The space where it had been was now a void, smooth, featureless, empty. And the mother's fingers were open. I sealed what remained in a tin box and buried it behind the house. For weeks the air seemed lighter, as though something had lifted. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Janine. "You should come to Brighton. We found something in the studio basement." When I arrived, she led me to a room beneath the old Hollingsworth premises, now part of the museum. The air was cool, thick with the scent of old chemicals and wood. Against the wall stood a stack of wooden crates. Janine opened one and carefully lifted out a metal box, tarnished but intact. Inside were several glass plates wrapped in brown paper. Most were portraits, unknown faces from a century ago. but at the bottom was one that made me freeze. It was the Thorne family again, but different. The mother's hand was empty, the letter was gone, and the boy, Edward, was looking directly into the lens, his expression hollow. In the reflection of his pupil, faint but visible, was the image of a hand, thin, pale, reaching from behind him. Janine exhaled. This was sealed under the floorboards. There's a note with it. She handed me a folded scrap of paper, the ink faded but legible. I did as she asked. I destroyed the plate, but it came back. I left Brighton that evening with the sea wind cutting cold against my face. The sun dipped low, and for a moment, every reflection in the train window seemed to have too many faces. When I got home, I checked the spot where I'd buried the tin. The soil looked undisturbed, but the box was gone. Only a piece of cardboard remained, half burned, the handwriting on the back smudged, but still legible. Forgive. And beneath it, a faint, almost invisible addition. Now it's yours. I keep the rest of my great-grandmother's belongings sealed in that same trunk. I don't open it anymore. Sometimes at night, I think I hear paper shifting inside. A faint sound, like someone turning a letter over and over, waiting for the right moment to hand it back. When I dream, I see the woman again, the mother from the photograph. She stands just beyond the lamplight, her hand open now, the letter gone. But her lips move as if whispering the same word she tried to hide more than a century ago. And every time I wake, my own hand aches, as though I've been clutching something too tightly in my sleep.